Hey there everybody, Professor Snart checking in. Okay, we are finally here. We have turned the corner, you might say, past midterm in our very short 5-week course, and we now look at our first full essay assignment. Although again, as I've mentioned before, it's really not that epic in scope or anything like that, but it is our first opportunity to put all the pieces together that we've been working through through each of these units. Okay, so in this announcement, we'll take a look at Essay 1. Again, I'll just sort of walk you through what's already there in the course to make sure everything is clear and trying to maybe emphasize certain things, highlight certain things for you. But it's also a good opportunity for you to sort of look at our due dates list again, or even just our units list, and kind of remind yourself of what things that we've done. Well, obviously we just did some basic introductions and that kind of thing, sort of got the ball rolling. And then it was really into Unit 3 that we started to learn some of the writing or the composition concepts for our course. And so you might be able to just kind of remind yourself of what was in there, and sometimes, like with Unit 3, the title of the unit will remind you of the key idea. But for something maybe like flight patterns, obviously we were reading that story or working with that story, but we were also doing other kind of more composition-based things as well. So it might pay to go back into some of these units and just kind of glance through the stuff that we've done in the same way that you would sort of review notes or reread textbook material in preparation for a more traditional like Scantron type exam where you got to learn a bunch of facts and then get them down on that exam paper. As I've mentioned a number of times, our essays are fundamentally the same kind of thing, even though it might not feel like it, or some people sort of forget that sometimes. So clearly, essay number 1, and then turning around to our final essay right afterwards, is your opportunity to show me that you have done the work for the course, taken your time, worked through the material, obviously done the assignments, but also like addressed the content of the course, understood concepts, and now can apply them in the assessment situation. So rather than jumping into Essay 1, which might feel like the most efficient thing to do, you're better served, and this is sort of one of those writing process things, you might be better served in the long run by doing a little review of just basic stuff that we've learned. And I'm talking about like 20 minutes, not hours and hours of review. So you sort of have a sense of like, okay, what have we done? What do I now need to show the professor that I have understood and can apply in this first kind of major assignment that we're doing? So in some ways you can sort of like study for an essay, even though it might not be exactly the traditional like rememorizing a bunch of facts kind of a thing. All right, but obviously paying attention to these due dates here, so Tuesday, June 21st, we have a quick turnaround into our final essay assignment, which is assigned in Unit 9, but then we'll unfold in a series of steps as we get right down towards the end of our class. So like I've said before, we learn the pieces, we now put them into place here, you get feedback obviously on that first essay, and then we turn around to really where most of the points for the course are bundled into Essay 1, and then our big final assignment where you are learning from everything in the previous unit and from strengths and weaknesses from Essay 1, and kind of like a capstone essay that we write for English 1102, but really if you think about it, for the whole 1101, 1102 composition sequence. This is sort of like the end point where all of that stuff that you learned and writing techniques and MLA research stuff that you learned, now we're putting it into place in a final major project. Okay, so reviewing due dates, obviously important. Taking a moment to be an effective, or have an effective writing process rather than just get the assignment, write the essay. That doesn't always work or produces a more stressful experience than really is necessary sometimes. So you're kind of reviewing where we've been, even just glancing at this or popping back into our units list. And then again, you can kind of remind yourself based on titles, but you can just glance into them. It really doesn't take that long just to sort of refresh your mind about what things that we've done. Okay, so we've put that final research piece into place with Unit 6, talking about secondary sources, how they have to be relevant and appropriate. I discussed that in the unit, but also in my previous video, so I won't rehearse that here. And now we have our first essay. All right, so the objective, obviously, to put it all into place, right? Okay, before we get to the assignment though, there are some more materials to work through. So again, you got to kind of budget your time here. And you don't want to skip this stuff because that's like skipping class or not being there to learn the material, and then how do you take a test on it? So there's a number of sample essays, and they're not just for you to read and look at. They're actually, you'll see them open up in this, this is actually a video of what they'll look like. But they open up in this player where you can read along, scrolling. There's notes that sort of point out important aspects of the essays. There's audio annotation, so it's not just you reading a sample essay. You're sort of being guided through it, so you get a sense again of what, they're not perfect essays by any means, but even if they make mistakes or things that we might like to change, you can sort of learn from that as well. There's a reminder about integrating sources effectively. Again, a video walkthrough, so you're just in some ways following examples, more of the same stuff here. But it's important that you work through this because then you have a much better chance of doing it right when it comes to the essay. And so again, you know, when you write the essay, there's not some mystical, magical set of things that I'm secretly looking for. I'm looking for evidence that you've looked at the sample essays. So if you're doing it right, then you're doing it right. But if you're doing it wrong, then it just shows me that either you didn't pay attention to the content, you just skipped it, like skipping class, or you didn't understand it, and so again, that's problematic if you're not applying it correctly. So, not to make it sound too mechanical or formulaic, but it really is a matter of like, this is the stuff that we learn, and then here's the test on it. So there's a direct connection between those two. Okay, everybody's favorite, MLA citation again, repeating some of the video material about using the databases, finding secondary sources, building a works cited page so you're formatting the whole page correctly, you're formatting entries correctly, more reminders, I know as if you wanted any more. But again, if I'm looking at your essay and this is all kind of not right, what is that telling me? It's telling me that you didn't take the 5 or 2 minutes or whatever this video is to just sit down and watch it. So you skip the class, you now try to do the test, and you don't maybe do that great. So that's the reason why it's not, you know, subjective. It's certainly not as subjective as some people think, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So some more material to work through, and then we have the essay assignment itself. All right. We do have a little bit more time, relatively speaking, although it might not feel that way. So again, be sure you're using your time wisely. That's what this part of the assignment is saying. Reminders about basic things, you know, no I voice or this kind of like conversational language. It just sort of gets in the way. We're looking for really not super formal, like it doesn't have to be pompous, but it should be direct and succinct, not kind of padded with extra words and that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons, honestly, that the assignment is so short, like 3 to 4 pages. And again, that's double spaced, it doesn't include your works cited. But once you develop, you know, some strong topic sentences, provide details or examples from the primary text, the short story you're discussing, build in, you know, explanations for that kind of a thing, using at least one secondary source. So again, you're just using skills that we learned in unit number 6. Once you build all those pieces in, 3 to 4 pages is just not that long, you'll discover. But yeah, so there's no reason to write like a 13-page essay when what we're looking for, what I'm looking to assess that you know, can be done in 3 to 4 pages. Certainly, as you go on in your educational careers, you'll be writing longer papers or doing, you know, more in-depth or longer projects, but that'll reflect what is happening in that particular course. So not that you'll never run into those, but our first essay here is not really the place for it. Okay, so you're choosing one of these prompts that I provide here. Exploring the role of stereotypes, or what you might call expectations, in a work we've read. So just one primary text that we've looked at, and again, incorporating that one secondary source. Discussing how setting works, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Or the theme of change or initiation. And the truth is that you'll see lots of overlap between these because short stories work that way. There's not just one theme happening, there's like multiple themes, and they tend to sort of speak to each other a little bit. But it's important for you, though, to just choose a key term, expectation, stereotype, initiation, whatever you want it to be, and stick with that. So even though you'll see some overlap like you could use a detail from a short story that might actually speak to any of these. Make sure that you're using that main key term consistently throughout your essay, so you don't float between, well, now it's stereotypes and I'm going to change it to the word expectation, and then in the end I'm going to change it to change or whatever. So you seem a little bit scattered, even though of course short stories tend to have a lot of overlap that way. Okay, so a quick note about setting. A really interesting work to think about as far as setting goes, and we saw this in Unit 5 with the boys and girls short story and the No Doubt music video comparison. You notice that it uses setting, or sort of like the visual aspect, what you can imagine in your mind, what you actually see on the screen, to help communicate the theme of those gender differences or stereotypes or gender expectations or whatever term you want to use. So be careful that you make an argument about how setting contributes to theme if you're going to do this prompt. Do not argue that, well, there's a setting in the story and that helps us to visualize where it takes place. That's just sort of a fact about how setting works in any short story. You need to connect it to theme, and that's really why it works so nicely in boys and girls, because there's such a clear use of setting, whether it's like the inside or the home versus the outside, the farm spaces, how that contributes to that theme of like differentiated gender spaces, right? So it's not just settings there, it helps us see the story, it contributes to theme. So I think this is a really interesting one, and it can be challenging, but if you're not careful about how you handle it, you can go in sort of wrong directions. And again, if I get an essay from someone that's just about how setting helps us see the story, well, that tells me a lot about how whether you've watched this or how much attention you're paying. All right, just about everything else in the assignment here is just reiterating stuff that we've looked at before, whether it's how sources have to be relevant and appropriate. Obviously, we're not just using the general websites, no matter what that website is. Has to be a commentary directly on the primary text, not something just related to an idea. Again, reminders about avoiding that sort of conversational I voice, so we have to be direct and succinct. We're not offering these huge either opening statements or topics or anything like that about society in general. Clearly, our short stories speak to social problems or social kind of issues, but our focus is just to write about how this happens in the story, not the big like global picture of how fiction may or may not solve the world's problems. And then some reminders about the importance of MLA citation and getting your works cited page correct. There's reminders just off the screen here. There's actually links to the library, the COD library site for how you set up entries from our textbook, and that would include the short story Boys and Girls, even though it's a PDF in our course just for weird copyright reasons, and for doing a database. So everyone's works cited is going to have at least, right, the one primary text and a database entry. So I'm providing the links right here to how to set those up. So again, you're just following the examples in the models. There's not complicated memorization or anything like that. All right, let's see. So use your time wisely, just like is discussed here in the Lego version of the Indiana Jones clip. You'll potentially recognize it. Everything's cooler when it's like Legoized. It's neat. Anyway, time consuming, I imagine, but okay, so let's go back to our due dates here. So again, you want to read that individual assignment carefully and start thinking about it. Take some time to sort of review where we've been, and really keep in mind, how many times have I said this now, that the essay is like the test that you're doing to show me that you've been working on the course, understand the concepts, and now can apply them in the assessment situation. So it's directly connected to all of the stuff that we've done up to this point. All right, so use your time wisely, and as always, if you have questions or concerns, be in touch with me.